So if we turn to fiction, the tagline for this particular session could be, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, to borrow from Charles Dickens, obviously. Now, future of work, is one such polarizing topic where we all have opinions and we all have some experience, but there's very few answers, real answers. And it's been creeping up on us, initially invisible, but now with COVID-19 playing like a propeller of sorts, it's bringing digital to all aspects of our lives. But it's also so hard to identify what are these short term changes that will blow over and what are the underlying shifts that will permanently define the future. And what that means for us as students, as professionals, as people who run businesses, or as consumers. Thankfully, we have three inspiring speakers whom Mahamaya spoke about already, who have been living this journey every day and who are part of creating this future. So, in this session, we will turn to them for their experiences and on ground insights about this. So, the detailed bios, as Mahamaya mentioned, they'll be put in the chat window. I'll give you like a one-liner bio for each of them. Hari Tien wears multiple hats: author, angel investor, advisor to VCs, CHRO Big Basket. He straddles the entire startup ecosystem from accelerators to early stage and late stage VC funds. He's a prolific author. He's authored 6 books so far. 2 of them have just got launched this month. So do look them up and read them. We have Poulomi Ganguly, who's the Director, Product and Strategic Initiatives at Hughes Global Education, which is into professional skilling and continued education. Research, new product development, strategy. These are areas where she has led large initiatives cross-border, both in MNCs as well as in small and medium enterprises. Poulomi is also part of multiple innovation forums and women's leadership initiatives. And we have Prithvijit Roy, who is a co-founder of Bridge I2I Analytic Solutions. Bridge I2I is enabling digital transformation and building the next generation of solutions to make AI real for enterprises. Jeet has over 22 years of experience in analytics. He was involved in setting up and scaling the analytics centers of excellence at both GE and HP, Hewlett Packard. And he's also set up an analytics professionals community, interesting one called Humans of Analytics. So welcome again to all the panelists. The format we have for the session is simple. We will discuss the most urgent and pressing questions for the first about 45 minutes. Meanwhile, those of you who have joined in as audience, please keep typing your questions in the chat window, and we'll, make sure that we keep time towards the end for answering these questions as well. And to get started, what we'll do is, keeping the digital and the polarizing nature of this topic in mind, we'll start with an audience poll. So we have 78% of the people who voted who are saying that over 50% of work today is digital. And, some of them for whom about less than 50% of the work is digital today. So I think that gives us a sense of, where the audience is coming from for our panelists as well. So my first question, with that, I'll turn to all of you, the panelists. And the first question is that, when we look at the digital future of work, it's impacting 3 things broadly: the work itself, which is shifting and becoming more digital. And we saw that in the poll as well. For many people, over 50% of the work becoming digital. But it goes deeper than that, right? The workforce itself is also becoming more digital. And, we have, seen that, and we will discuss more about that. And the workspace is also shifting from offices as we knew it to more evolving, digital workspaces. So given these 3 shifts, which you see, if you could all tell us one short-term and one permanent shift you see across all these or any of these 3. And maybe Poulomi, you can start, and then we can, go around.
So in one word, short-term impact that we've seen is value arbitrage, or in other words, for a company sitting in US with customers in Mexico and talent working out of India, maybe in a staycation in Shimla. So that has been a reality for the past 8 months in terms of our manpower or resource structure. In the long term, of course, it has been disruptive innovation, specifically on focus on tools of collaboration. So these would be my one-word answer for your question.
Right. Thank you, Poulomi. We'll build more on that. Maybe Jeet, if you can add, and then we can have Hari round up that first question.
Sure. So Devlin, I think it also comes out from the poll, and also in some form over the last 8 months, we have COVID in mind and what has been the implications of digital. And that's why you see 50% plus people saying certain things which are more digital. So in some form, I think the biggest realization in my view, in a short-term view, that so many things can be done from home. You could sit in your home and your kids can study from home. You could work from home. Most of us who are fortunate enough who can work from home, and also again you can buy sell from home. So that's the short term, I think, the biggest realization that so much of it is possible. But I think a permanent changes, I think all of this will lead to a lot of, I would say, a mind share change and a behavior change in form of consumers thinking what's possible, employees thinking what's possible. Means you don't have to necessarily go back to office, all of you all at the same time. So I think that's a big shift, how people think about digital and how digital becomes a part of life. So that's really a big permanent change in my view, as opposed to a few years back. So because technology was always there, but it's now more possible.
Right, right, right. And you call it, I think, the art of the possible.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, maybe Hari, if you can take that, and you've seen it from multiple different directions. So probably if you
Yeah.
can share your thoughts.
Yeah, I think what I'm struggling to figure out is what is short term and what is long term. I think I can clearly see a lot of trends taking shape. How many of them will endure? I think only time will tell. But my own sense is that a lot of the changes that we are seeing will endure, which is work from home for a majority of people who don't need to actually be in a warehouse or a factory. I think many of them will be working from home. So for example, at Big Basket, we've taken the call that in the corporate offices, on the corporate teams, not more than 30% will ever return to work. So we've even been surrendering office space. And several companies are also taking shape. Several industries are taking shape. Several unicorns are being formed in the the education ed tech space. Recently we had a unicorn in the Helion portfolio where Pubmatic, which is relying on people spending time on the net, a lot more time. It's an ad tech company that turned a unicorn on NASDAQ. So I think we can see some trends taking shape, some mega trends taking shape. One thing which I think is certainly short term is kids' education online. I think kids will have to go back to school. There's no way you can have 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds learning online. Their attention span is very low, and I think they need to be in school.
Correct, correct. In fact, that's so true. And I was reading an article today in Bloomberg, which said that the amount of time we can spend doing things at home is correlated with also the level of education, right? So it's people with advanced degrees who probably have the privilege of doing a lot of the work from home. You can again look at it as blue, gray, white collar probably of jobs. But that's kind of, the underlying reality as well, right? That, those who didn't get a chance for formal education also won't get a chance to be part
Yeah.
of this digital work.
Yeah.
Right. So just to go deeper in that, Hari, I'll probably again come to you for this. Now you've talked about this, even in your book you've written about this, Hari, that some of the the most big changes in the way the world has worked so far, they have been triggered by technological developments. So that's one of your hypotheses. At the same time, this time a pandemic has proved to be the tipping point, and it is challenging and maybe even changing the future of work. So how do
Yeah.
you look at this difference, and where do you think this will take us?
Yeah, I think everything that's good about mankind, I would say, has largely been triggered by some technological development. And, from time to time, there has been a debate whether technology is good or bad. Right from the days we were kids, we used to have this debate whether technology is good or bad, whether it takes jobs or creates jobs. So I think I have no doubt that technology has provided all the triggers for the benefit of humanity. So, for example, people were worried when the spinning machine was invented, whether it would take away weaving jobs or not. But what the spinning machines did was that it helped clothe the world. So you had locomotives and jet engines. People thought, will the bullock carts be out of business? Will transport be out of business? But then, trains and planes helped mankind travel a lot more. All of us live so far away from homes. So I think a human thirst for, human beings have an unending set of needs. So once one need gets fulfilled, a new set of needs tends to get created. I think this unending set of human needs, or the elasticity of human needs, is what ensures that technology does not take away jobs. When dynamite was created, people thought, you know what, the manual labor will lose the jobs. But actually, dynamite helped create the Suez Canal, Panama Canal, the Bhakra Nangal Dam. It raised human aspiration to do so many things that we never aspired to do. And the same thing is true for medical technologies. Medical technologies is not replacing doctors. It helps perform procedures that we never dreamt of performing in the past. And you had the green revolution. People talk of food tech today. Food tech is only delivery of food, but real food technology happened, some 35 years back, when hunger was overcome. Malthus had predicted that populations will grow at geometric proportions and food will grow in arithmetic proportions. So very soon there will have to be a crisis from time to time. But that proved to be wrong, because technology solved that problem. So I think technology has been the biggest trigger for all the changes so far to the way mankind has lived and mankind has worked. I think for the first time, we are seeing a medical crisis also bringing about something very fundamental. And some of those things I can imagine, I'm just trying to hear only, look into the future. You can always be wrong about these things. I think the very concept of urban spaces is likely to change. The very reason why cities, were formed in the first place, all offices, in the business districts, were all because people needed to come together to perform work. That was the belief, and that led to rapid development of cities. Now today, there's no reason why you can not sit in, some town in Imphal, for example, and perform work for a company in Bangalore. You don't have to necessarily come to Bangalore. So I think I can imagine urban spaces changing significantly, as a result of which there would be more equitable development. You can have tier 3 towns also, having people who are working in well-paid jobs, and therefore resulting in development of those places as well. Democratization of urban structures, I can clearly see happening. I can also see remote working that I talked about. Brick and mortar universities, for example, right? Do we really need to have these expensive brick and mortar universities? You look at Harvard Business School, Harvard or MIT, such expensive campuses people have built. Do we really need students to spend all their time on campuses? My daughter is finishing her second term of the third year online at University of New South Wales, and she's pretty good to go. And I'm not saying that you need to spend all the time away from campus and doing online education, but you can spend 1 month or 2 months out of 12 months offline in the campus, but the remaining can be done online. Why do you need those expensive buildings and all of that? So I can imagine a whole education space, undergoing significant change. A lot of online education, online companies that provide education certifications, I think they will be the companies of the future. Supply chains, I can clearly see significant changes, possibility of changes. So for example, today, I think, the supply chains have become very global, and these global supply chains have raised the quality of living for all of us. We are enjoying the standards of living of today because of these global supply chains. But the risk of a global supply chain is that contamination somewhere can spread very rapidly. A few companies are controlling food processing for the entire world. So a contamination happens somewhere. It's very difficult to then control. It goes all over the world. So will food supply chains become more local? I don't know. So I'm just saying there's a possibility that some of the supply chains may undergo a change. That's very much a possibility. And ultimately, I would think, the pandemic has taught us, reinforced once again, that the way we work, the way we lead has to change. I think a lot of crises in this world, including this pandemic, including 2008, everything has been created by, a lot of alpha male greed, ambition, misplaced sense of power. I think we need to bring in that feminine leadership style and blend it with the masculine style. So I think recognition that some of that at the workplace also has to undergo a change. I think we need to become a better, company, better world.
Thank you, Hari. That's very powerful. I think underlying all of this, I think, is a promise that there could be a better world, and maybe we didn't see it coming till it hit us in the face. And you mentioned one of the points, I think, which Poulomi you started with, right? That you could be anywhere, and you could really be part of the digital workforce as long as you have the right skills. And through your work, Poulomi, I think that's what you are enabling, right? So you are enabling people to get the right skills for advancement through upskilling and in the professional education space. So with the data which you have, which you look at regularly, can you give us a sense of which of these digital skills are becoming more important now and which are past their hype cycle? And if you can also tell us across different levels of experience.
Yeah, so something which is really past its hype is the concept that I'm going to learn only once in life, and that's through my formal education. Today, the lifelong learner is a reality. So the continuing education segment is booming, and the evidence of that is a disruptive event like the pandemic. Now, even in the continuing education system, while all of us hope or aspire to be lifelong learners, there were two kinds of learners. Basically, develop people who take on a course or a program for their own current self-development, and people who want to take it up for aspiration to the next goal. What we've also seen in the last 8 months is the demand or the need for aspirational programs, right? The next gen programs has kind of taken up. For example, when tech assisted education started, something which was very popular is general management programs. That slowly moved on to so when it started like a general management cookie cutter program, then slowly the next phase was more about management for healthcare professionals, so again general management, but for a specific segment. While that trend continues, today it has taken to the next phase where a lot of amalgamation of industry 4.0 skills are happening with respect to management. So very popular today programs, of course, the core skill sets, core industry 4.0, like a AI or a data science, robotic, full stack. But along with that, amalgamation, for example, blockchain for supply chain management, or AI for healthcare, for teleradiology. So very customized programs, not for broad audiences, but very focused audiences with an impact. In terms of the learning segment or the learning curve, what we've seen during this pandemic is most investments are happening for people either who are entering the workforce, somebody with 0 to 2 years of experience or even lower, and a higher amount of investment for somebody with 10 years of experience and above. So there has not been much investments in continuing education for the mid-management segment, but a lot of innovation, ask for new programs, ask for customization, ask for micro learning for the lower part of the segment and the higher part of the segment. The other very, very interesting trend that we see is total democratization of the certification. So while certification continues to be a need, but as Hari also mentioned, through asynchronous learning, of course, learners were able to get certificates either through NPTEL or, Coursera, edX, but even in synchronous learning, right? People, there is a segment of people who learn for the knowledge, but then of course, and it is a reality, there is a bigger section of people who learn, but they would also want a certificate along with it. And with, international universities, IITs, IIMs, everybody in the fray, and the focus moving to synchronous education, I think we are in for disruptive times.
Great. So assuming, I think the audience is a mix of both people in the 0 to 2 and, people above that. I think, there is definitely scope for, courses like this, which, we can upskill ourselves and, may not have to go to university full time for doing that. And I think the new education policy also allows for this, right? Universities, getting into more digital education and digital certificates, which could be, looked at. Coming to you, Jeet, so I think, the areas which, Poulomi talked about, some of them, are people, you work with, which is people skilled in AI, in analytics and statistics. But the focus of your work is AI for digital enterprise, right? So often, and this is the confusion people have, when they think of AI, they look at the end products, like a smart car or like a smart IoT solution. But through your work, you are actually trying to help organizations change their nature of work. And that is where you see also AI playing a role. So can you give us a deeper sense of that, right? How organizations are using AI to become smarter, better, more efficient? And in that, what role does skills play?
Sure. Sure, Deblina. And as you said, I would first start a little bit demystifying these terms, because sometimes, AI or artificial intelligence is abused and also interpreted in many ways. And I would break up. You said the term smart, and I will for a moment differentiate between AI and digital. because in some form, everything is becoming digital. Because means today, all of us, after using Uber, BizBasket, and others, we are becoming digital. We like that app, which we can do so many things with it, and that's really digital. And enterprises have so many options to today become digital, given so many technologies, cloud, mobile, and so many things. And that's a no-brainer. That's happening, but my view is digital is kind of incomplete without the role of artificial intelligence or AI, and more so because in some form, digital, actually the models generate a humongous amount of data. Anything you do on digital, if you're selling online, if you're using IoT devices or others, all these models actually generate a humongous amount of data. And that gives you an opportunity to actually sense all of this data, learn from this data, and drive certain actions which are very automated. And that is really AI in my view. The ability to make the digital model, as you said, more smarter. Today we hear about a smart autonomous car or something, but actually this is possible on everything you do in an enterprise. So you could use a lot of these digital models and the data from it and really automate a lot of your actions. The action could be making a recommendation on BigBasket to your customer. It could be about seeing something happening and being able to alert someone. So all of those are really the actions which can be done in an automated way. And what it means for enterprises in some form, I think what's happening is there are three things happening. One is all of this will lead to certain things being fully automated, but most cases you will see those are very repeatable stuff. So from data you are learning along with digital, you are actually kind of there's a whole RPA or the robotic process automation concept, and even someone is now calling it intelligent process automation. Some work will actually become AI driven and become fully automated, but that's part of it. I think the bigger play, I think is Hari mentioned it. He said, doctors today will use AI or digital to be more effective. And that's really a bigger game, even in enterprises and others, where you are coexisting, man and machine exists together and being more effective, which is where AI will come into play almost on everything you do. And the third in some form would be, again, there are many things humans can't do at all, which is where I think machine will allow you to do, in my view, which I think will also be a big part of the game. So that's three, and skills obviously has a role to play, because this is not really which is something we have been doing always, but we have foundationally and fundamentally have in a country like India a lot of these skills available. How do we adopt it? And it's not one single skill. A lot of it is technology skill. A lot of it is data science. I think, as Poulomi mentioned, a lot of it is also data engineering, or a lot of the skill is about how do I read an image or video into, again, as data form, as rows and columns. So those are new skills. And I think as they come into being, there's a big opportunity to use those skills to really bring in a more effective AI play in enterprises. So that's how I would look at it. And it's really, we are scratching the surface in some form in that space. So there's lot more to come in that space in the time to come.
Right, right. Thank you. In fact, often when people think of these skills, they think of people who are going to enter these careers, right, where they work on data science or they work on AI. But I think there's a much bigger segment, which what Gartner calls is citizen data scientist. The kind of people Hari spoke about. You could be a doctor, but you could be enabling, AI in how you do predictions better, or you look at diagnosis better. Or you could be teacher, or you could be a edtech company, but you could be using more personalized learning. So I think that is probably a much bigger segment, which enables a lot more people to get a sense of digital skills, and skills which involve analytics and data science and AI. But we may not ourselves be building those models. We may be interpreting the models. Is that something which all of you agree with?
Absolutely, Deblina. On one hand,
Yes.
I think both of those will coexist. There are people who will build this, and a larger place, there is more adoption. So the part you are talking about, the adopters also have to learn it. Without that, it will not possible, and that's also a big part of the skill.
Right.
I genuinely believe that, what Prithvi said, that digital skills, technology, and humans will work together to do new things, not to displace what is currently being done, So I think human needs, as I say, are infinitely elastic. So we'll aspire for more. So as digital and people come together, they will help provide those aspirations.
Right. And I think
also think, as future of work becomes more digital, as consumers of these technologies, our appreciation for these technologies also increases.
correct. Exactly. And I think that's what we're seeing among all of us, right? My daughter, I have a daughter who's a teenager, and she was asking, how did we order food before Swiggy and before Big Basket? I think they have not seen a time when you used to go out and, order food and, kind of do that entire cycle, which is today made so easy. So I think that's also probably the biggest myth about future of work, right? That digital and automation will take away jobs. I think what all of you through your experience are sharing is it's not about that. It's actually about human needs being so elastic that we'll be enabled to do so much more, with these technologies, in place. So thanks a lot for sharing that. Mahamaya, if you can show the second poll now, we do have a second poll to go a little deeper into this topic. So if you can just show that, Mahamaya, and if all
Yes, I'm just doing that.
that'll be great. So the question is, which business function do you think has greater scope for digital transformation? And there are functions mentioned here. So you can choose any of them or you can choose other. And we'll close again in 15-20 seconds and we'll show the results from the audience poll.
We have about 45% of the votes that have come in. If people are having trouble accessing the poll, then you can just put your answers in the Q&A box in case you're not able to see the poll. Should I end it, Pulumi? Do you want to give it a couple of more seconds?
Yeah, maybe let's just...
Sorry, Deblina.
Yeah.
My bad.
A couple of seconds and close it then, Mahamaya.
Okay, I think I'm going to close it now then.
Sure.
And share the results.
Great. So this is coming to you then, Jeet. So in your work, you've looked at AI in and digital transformation in companies. And, we see the answer here, right? Where marketing is marketing and then finance, product are coming up as key areas where people see there's more adoption. So I wanted to ask you, where do you see the adoption more across organizations? Is it still at a functional level? Or do you see some people now, evolving to adopt this at a more enterprise strategy level? And if you can give, examples of both.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and it's good to see the results in some form validates what we are seeing in many enterprises also. And the two, although we might say is functional, today it's not so much functional. If you see behind the scene, some of these functions are trying to do something, and that's probably an enterprise strategy. It might be delivered in functions. For example, you would see marketing, sales and others are high on adoption of digital and AI. And part of it is because I think these are tremendous opportunity for enterprises to give a very contextual experience to their customers and clients, which is big now, which is where a marketing, sales, customer experience, and other areas are thinking and adopting AI and digital both. So that's one. But second, I think also there's a lot of realization which is around how you run your operations. And how does that become more digital? Today, finance uses a lot more automation and digital RPA and other supply chain. The way you plan it is changing and adopting it. So a lot of operations in the traditional way is also adopting a lot more digital and AI view. And the third in some form, and some of it might be driven in a functional way, some of it might also be cross enterprise. Like for example, what we are seeing, a consumer packaged goods or FMCG company, when they start thinking about digital, a lot of it in their mind is, I have to now sell beyond retailers. I have to sell online. I have to sell through Big Basket. I have to sell through my own .com. So then the functions are becoming a little irrelevant for them. For them, it's a new business model or a new revenue model, and they're cutting beyond the functions and thinking about it in totality, because the problems are very different now. Because now what SKUs are visible on the mobile phone is very different from what is there on the retail store kind of a thing. So it's a little, so the same functions may not be able to adopt it. So a lot of adoption is also happening as businesses are thinking new revenue models. And an extreme examples are also new business models coming up. Airbnb, Uber, Big Basket are absolutely new things over the last 8-10 years as compared to what was happening in the past. So yes, so in some form, older enterprises are thinking how to stay relevant by doing certain things. Newer business models are coming in, which are just inherently digital, and many of them may not be just same as earlier. You might not have any inventory. You are doing digitally matching demand and supply. So a lot of those are just unthought of in the past, which is starting to come in. So I do agree the functional piece, but it's also going beyond that significantly.
That's true in India as well, not just in other countries.
Absolutely. And you have one of the panelists who has been doing this as a part of the business again. And we are seeing a lot. We work with multiple companies across India who's doing this.
Right, right. So, if there's anything to add to that, Polami, Hari, from the poll results you saw, would be great to hear from you. Otherwise, I'll probably get into some more specific questions based on your experience. So, Polami, I think the question to you is, we've all, seen the gig economy being talked about a lot, and a lot of these digital skills, lend themselves naturally to gig economy jobs, right, and more freelance kind of jobs. But again, gig jobs can be across the spectrum of digital work. So, from the data which again you look at, do you see gig work actually becoming a viable alternative, really big alternative? And again, can you give us some examples across levels of experience? Where will this become more viable? And what can we really expect going forward for people who are looking at such careers?
So, Debolina, when I saw that question, the first it reminded me. So I had taken this physical program on design thinking as a framework for innovation from Alexander Grotz.
Yeah,
he's a global leader in design thinking. So the first thing he said that so of course he is a design thinking expert, a global expert. He has his own company called ProGlove. He's an author of sci-fi fiction. And then the statement he made is, I don't have a home. The world is my home and I live out of suitcases. And I'm a gigger. And at that point of time, this was just 2 years back, 2018. I hadn't heard of the term gig. And then I was like, what kind of a person? Because I was like a one role, one company person. Today, in 2 years, a pandemic has taught us that what flexibility needs to be. And from the segment that I come from, which is the EdTech segment, although we've never called it gig economy, but the network or the channel, the last mile connect to the customer, was always done by these series of micro entrepreneurs. Who would be a part of the organization, would be doing something else. So gig economy was actually always a part of the EdTech segment wherever the last mile connect was necessary. Now, again, what our adoption to gig economy, again, as I mentioned, what we've seen is very stark trends in the last 8 months. So in terms of experimenting with new things, we've seen the senior leadership segment, companies having part-time CFOs, companies having part-time chief product officers are reality. Today, especially not so much in established so-called behemoths, but in SMEs, medium enterprises and startups. The other segment which has been very, very open to experimenting new things is the millennial segment. I think they are far more courageous than we are. I am not a millennial, but they are far more courageous, and that is where when I talk. So whenever we see a new program request that comes to us, and we map that again into segment, what it looks is in terms of more action, more enterprising, more courage, more entrepreneurial spirit. It has always been that 5 years of experience and then more than 15 years experience, people who have achieved what they want to in their professional lives and then want to kind of leave a legacy. Again, unfortunately, the middle of the pyramid has been very, very conservative in their need and ask. And one thing could be because of their personal lives. Most of them are in the middle of their careers, middle of their families. So the openness to gig economy has always also been an openness to accept digital skills to grow themselves. And I always remember, Alex, maybe even in a few years, I will also say that, I'm also a lucky gigger. The other segment, which has adopted gig economy is the women. I think gig economy should be adopted. It is going to do wonders for women, with a lot of women who want to get back to the workforce. The second segment we don't focus much on, but I am also kind of mentoring a startup, which is the silver segment. Today 9% of our population is the silver population, which is aimed to grow to 20% of the population. So 300 million will be the total number of silver population in India by 2050.
Above 5 or above 60?
So pre-silver 55 all the way to 70, but this would be 60 to 75. And our generation silver is going to be very different from our parents or grandparents. This is going to be total new consumer segment who are going to be employable and who would appreciate the gigness in the economy.
Right. Thank you so much, Poulami. I think from the missing middle in the gig economy to, I think, the silver segment in the gig economy, I think there are some new insights which we could learn from.
And going back to Hari's point, developing the alpha female. So they would also be a big adopters of gig economy.
Yeah, exactly. So Hari, coming to you, I think these are some of the topics I know it's very close to you. And at BigBasket, I think from what I understand, 90% of your workforce is distributed workforce, right? And I think sometimes I think what is questioned is many of them are these short-term opportunities as gigs, and are they really looking at career? And I know you have a strong point of view of that. So I think I would just like to understand a little bit more about that for our audience. And B, I think with such a distributed workforce, and other questions which really build a great company, right? Like, for example, the organizational culture and the employee well-being. How do you manage those with such a distributed workforce?
So BigBasket and most large companies would have a distributed workforce. And the way we operated, whatever challenges the distributed workforce has existed even before the pandemic. And I think to answer your question about the gig, we have a very big gig component in the blue collar category. So almost 80%, 85% of our workforce is the blue collar variety, which is delivery boys, warehouse staff who do the picking, packing of orders, stacking of orders. In that category, obviously, as you said, attrition levels are always high, much higher than we would like them to be. But that's the reality of the game, and companies, I think, need to adapt and learn how to deal with that. And that's the reality of an India, which will always be a blue-collar nation. If you just look at India at a macro level, take its GDP of $2.5 trillion, about 25% savings, and if you invest that savings to create nearly 12 million jobs a year, you would find the amount of capital available can only create largely blue-collar workforce. So the reality is that India will be a blue-collar workforce. Many in the blue-collar are not going to care a lot for career. So I think, we can all sit here and, hope that they care for a career, believe that career is important for them. I think for them, what is really important is a fair wage, being treated with respect, being rewarded and recognized for the right things. I think those are extremely important. For example, being paid a salary on time and having a help desk that explains deductions for them is far more important than a career. Eventually, money matters for them and companies can't pay them enough for them to begin to think about a career. People like us, for us, career is important because we've had a good education. We want stability, we want to learn new things, whereas for them, putting food on the family in a reliable way and accessing some of the better things in life is far more important than a career. So that's the reality. And the good thing is also that many of the blue collar jobs do not require, a person to operate or stay in the job for a year to become productive. So it's just 2 weeks of training and you are hitting the road. You are almost as productive as somebody who's 6 months with you. So the good thing is that people get productive very quickly. So that's the reality. Coming to distributed workforces, I think, have always existed. It's just that, some of our global outsourcing, offshoring space have had the same team broken up and distributed between Costa Rica, Krakow in Poland, Bangalore, and maybe in Japan. And yet they have all written the playbook for being effective in a virtual environment. They have figured out how to drive culture in such an environment. And especially when time zones are also different, it's not very easy to get FaceTime, even, on Zoom. So I think they've figured out the playbook. It's not that it's impossible to drive culture in distributed teams. And I think at BigBasket, we've been able to, operate without any challenge, even after the pandemic. Post-pandemic, I think the entire corporate office or the teams in corporate are working from home. And I really haven't faced a challenge. And, there are so many issues discussed about, well-being. You talked about, mental health. I think these are, I have a couple of views on mental health and well-being. So I think largely well-being, is really the responsibility, to my mind, of an individual. I think 80% of well-being, whether it's physical well-being or mental well-being, is an individual's responsibility. An individual also happens to be part of a family, part of a company, part of other communities. And to some extent, the communities and companies also have a role in the well-being of this individual, and therefore need to create safe workspaces, secure workspaces, conducive for collaboration. That's important. So I would say more than addressing well-being, it's about creating conditions which, create effectiveness of work. But that's very big debate is possible on that. So take Amazon, for example, right? Amazon is known for an extremely aggressive culture, very pressure cooker-like culture. And you can justify that. Amazon justifies that, saying that we are disrupting the world. And this is essential, because if we don't have that environment where people are challenging each other very openly, where they're able to, humiliate somebody when deadlines are not met, where response times are expected to be minutes. So, that's their view. Some people love Amazon because of that and perfectly fit in there, and some people hate it. Now, should you say that Amazon should change, or should you as an individual figure out that Amazon may not be the right place for me, or may be the right place for me? So I think individuals must make those right, wise choices about their jobs, the companies they work for, the cultures that they would like to be a part of, the bosses that they would like to work for. I think these are all individual choices which eventually impact, mental health, well-being to a great deal. I think if you fall for the temptation of, having an Amazon on your CV, but you don't really like being part of the aggressive culture, then it's your problem. You are not doing the right thing. What can Amazon do for you? So I think, these are some of the broad things I have. And I think in a remote setup, companies which do not create activity traps are likely to be more successful. Because, in a face-to-face environment, companies end up creating activity traps. And activity traps means useless activities which give the company, which give stakeholders, give themselves a sense that they're doing something. So I think if you cut out all these activity traps and only focus on what is really essential, then the working in a remote environment becomes so much better, because then you're not having unnecessary reviews, unnecessary projects, unnecessary, initiatives. You're just focusing on the bare essentials, focusing on inspiring your team, giving them a sense of purpose, giving them direction, and maybe doing some reviews.
Right. No, thank you so much, Hari. That is really, really critical. And I think connecting the dots from what all of you mentioned, as the organizations become more digitally lean, using all the tools and technologies Jeet spoke about. I think on individuals, what is incumbent is we have to get the right skills and make the right choices. whether it's about our well-being or whether it's about the culture we want to be part of. And I think also about how we choose to work, because work is getting more distributed. And for many people, it's not going to be a lifetime of career and one job anymore. It's probably going to be more about immediate future and how that is enabled, and which for a lot of people, it will be blue collar in the near future. I think that will not shift in India. So finally, I think a lot of people attending today, are working in the social sector, social impact sector, and each of you have had, experience of helping or enabling companies in this sector. So I want to connect these two topics, looking at this digital future of work, and what do you think could be an immediate, both an opportunity and challenge for companies working in the social sector. So this is open for all of you. But if you could add your thoughts on that, because there are people who are working in these organizations, and I think it would be helpful for them also to get a sense of, what could be an opportunity and what could be a challenge.
Or maybe I think since Prithviraj and Palomi let me just try and go take a shot at this. I'm not an expert on this, but I instead of talking about the direct impact on social impact sector, let me talk a little bit about how micro entrepreneurship and a few other things have been very positively impacted by technology. So I think, if you just step back a little, the way Aadhaar changed, the way benefits were distributed to the beneficiaries, I think was such a game changer. In the past, all of the social welfare benefits were leaking at every point. So the beneficiaries never received anything. So one of the biggest purposes of a welfare state and social impact is to ensure that the right people receive the benefits. I think technology has solved the problem in such a beautiful way. The other places, for example, in the past, when I was young, when I was growing up, we had a few books that everybody read, a few songs that everybody listened to, a few singers that were so famous, like, like Lata Mangeshkar and Kishore Kumar. There was no democratization. But I think some of these platforms, like whether it's YouTube or Google or Amazon, have really empowered the micro entrepreneur. Now, any aspiring artist can write a book and expect, a bunch of people who absolutely loves what she writes. And you could have people who starting a kitchen and creating a very niche dishes and putting it up on Swiggy, and therefore making themselves available to a bunch of consumers. So I think, some of these so-called monopolistic platforms have actually democratized and enabled the so-called micro entrepreneurs to be able to flourish and do very interesting things. So I think technology has impacted in many ways, even, for example, people like skills development, for example, right? Plumbers, for example, how would you discover a plumber in the past? You would never know. It was just word of mouth. So there was no incentive for a plumber to upskill and learn new things. But today, since they're an urban clap and are rated at the end of every service, and their new business depends upon their overall ratings, they have an incentive to upskill and improve their earnings. So platforms like these have suddenly created opportunities for, middle India and lower the pyramid India to be able to learn, use their skills and get income. That's my broad comment.
Yeah, I do completely agree with Hari, and I don't think I'm also an expert in this space, but my 2 cents, other than what Hari mentioned, is obviously everything that's happening. I think the intent is eventually to look at, can digital help a better life? Otherwise, there's no meaning to all of this. So I think in some form, and that's where it also connects to the social sector. I think a lot of these advancements, I think several Hari mentioned, but I think is really on a positive thing in terms of, say, I'll just take example, rural finance or agri-tech or telemedicine from a health standpoint, or education in terms of the ability with 5G and others being able to reach out to a lot more people and being able to cover them, which we could not have done in the past. So those are surely positive. So eventually, I think it's going to be, again, better for everyone, but it's a journey. And the journey will pose quite a few challenges, and I don't think it is going to be without challenges. And the first and foremost, there are some immediate impact. I think employment in certain form, blue-collar job and others will have an impact. And I think we have to think about what does that mean. And a very connected affair with that is about reskilling. and how we rethink the whole reskilling aspect, because the same jobs may not exactly exist. So, and if there are newer ways people, and it doesn't have to be that everyone has to be thinking AI and others. It's more, Deblina, to your initial point, a lot of people have to learn adopting AI. A lot of people will have to do things in a very new way after technology comes in. So that whole thinking, if there's no structure, and I think there's a big stage for the social sector to come in and make that happen as we go forward, because in some form the genie is out of the bottle, so there's no point thinking that we'll put that back to the bottle. There's no reverse action to digitization or digital. It's going to happen, so we have to figure out how we live with it. It's for better, we just have to make it better over time.
Right. Anything to add, Poulomi?
So I think it has been summarized very well. I think one key opportunity will be taking technology to that last mile, right? All of us have access to technology, but does that last mile connect, right? Again, at the beginning of the pandemic, when all this brouhaha started about online education, and all of us as adopters were able to find that solution when somebody in the city who has a laptop could take asynchronous, but then somebody who was in a tier 3, tier 4 city, teachers were able to deliver that same content in terms of microsite pockets in their WhatsApp, right? So we'll have to kind of innovate and find solutions to adopt technology and take it to the last mile. Only then it will equilibrate the whole ecosystem. The other both challenge and opportunity, which we look up to social sector for, is empathy leadership. That they should continue and lead us in that direction. Because apart from cognitive skills, what pandemic has taught us is emotional skills are as important.
Right. No, thank you so much for sharing these perspectives. And just to kind of summarize this point, I think Hari, kind of mentioned this, but there's a book which was written by Edmund Phelps. So Hari talked about micro entrepreneurship, but I think the idea basically comes from what Edmund Phelps wrote about mass flourishing, right? And I think he connected it to 3 points in history: 18th century Britain, 19th century America, and China, 20th century. And I think the key point was, reason they have flourished at these specific points of time is because either accidentally or with intent, they created these conditions where, somebody who might not have really big aspirations or a lot of education, but they were able to tinker and, really pursue their small opportunities in their local community, right? Which is probably what a lot of micro entrepreneurship refers to. It's not about having the most breakthrough startup idea, but it's about in that community being able to do something and being able to sustain and maybe create 5 jobs in that community. So, and I think social sector is right in the center of that, right? Because they're working with volunteers, they're working with local communities, they're working with really tier 3 and communities and villages where they can bring this to light. So maybe mass entrepreneurship could work very well if the social sector can take it up even more, and digital could play the role, like some of you mentioned, of being the backbone for building that connect, whether it's education or it's even even an Instagram or a Facebook for propagating these kind of solutions. So I think we're coming to almost the end of the session. I would like to kind of do a quick rapid fire 2 questions. The first question is, in your opinion, what has been the biggest myth about the digital future of work? A lot of people believe it, but it's not true, and we should stop believing.
I think it's still about all of this is going to replace human, which is a big myth.
Machines will replace humans. So
Yes.
that's a big myth. So that's from
that was exactly mine, Prithvi. So you took it away from me.
now Hari, we have to give a new one.
I have to say, I can't say anything new. I really, this is the only one I thought of.
Okay, I think we can take Hari's point on, there'll be more blue collar jobs than white collar jobs. I think there are a lot of people who think digital just means more and more white collar jobs. But I think you stated, the contrarian view, Hari, right? That there'll be probably more blue collar jobs. So Poulomi, coming to you, I've made it more difficult now for you. What is the
I don't have the excuse of Prithvi taking my comment, but yes, this is the alternative, the plan B. The myth itself is the future of work is digital. The reality is the future of work is actually phygital.
Yeah, phygital. Yeah, correct.
And the phygital fee part of it depends, as we saw in the poll, depending on what you're doing, but definitely it is phygital.
Got it. Got it. Last question. I think I'll ask after we finish the audience questions. I have one last question, but there are 2-3 audience questions. Let me open it up. So there's a question from, okay, he didn't mention the name, but the question is, can we talk about any digital courses, skills and programs and institutions for social sector or public policy? So I can take this and I think you can add. So there's ISDM, which is an institute for the social sector, which has a lot of development sector courses. Again, I think Azim Premji University has a lot of courses for enabling both teaching as well as development sector courses. So these two for sure I know of. On the digital side, I think Arthan itself has some courses on the digital side. So I think there are also fellowships which are provided by IDEX and other programs which are all digital in nature, and they also have internships with them. So these are ones I am aware of. Anything else any of you would like to add?
So Harvard X has a whole section on social sector. That is one. Then IIM Calcutta is also shortly releasing a series of courses. One is for educators specifically who work in the social sector.
Yeah, this is a leadership one, right? So for education leaders.
Yes.
Got it. I think there's another similar question which also says any scholarships or internships based digital skills programs in the social sector. So internships, I think we talked about. IDEX has internships which focus on placing people in the social sector. And it's a global fellowship which runs twice a year. Apart from that, all the organizations which our panelists are part of and similar organizations obviously have internships. So I think whoever probably has asked the question, maybe you can individually get in touch with us post the session, and any companies personally which I know, I will connect you to. There's another question from Samir Pandey. This is about the education sector. So what he asks is, we have seen how despite government pushing for online education, millions of children from rural and marginalized communities missed out because of the digital divide. How are we going to address this challenge? So maybe you can take that, Poulomi, I can add.
Yes, and this relates back to your question. That is where we need the help of the social sector, right? That last mile connect. That for technology there is a framework and a infrastructure part of it, right? But again, from very positive news, one story I can tell about is what Sahaj Path has been doing in West Bengal. Again, having teachers have on a 24/7 call line, as well as providing them micro learning through the WhatsApp of the parent. But this will always remain a challenge as diverse as the country as ours, or even in the healthcare sector. What we've seen is a lot of CSR work. Somebody who's doing very good CSR work is Mahajan Clinic, using AI as the teleradiology and making it available to the last mile in their mobile vans. Now, remember, somebody like a Dr. Mahajan, who himself is a radiologist par repute, for him to accept machine AI and then decide that, the reading of AI of his x-rays is better than him, that itself is a huge step. So last mile connect, I think we'll have to work in hand with the social sector to make it possible.
Correct. And just to add, Samir, I think there are many organizations who are working in this space. Just to name a couple, I think there's Think Zone, which is working in really rural Odisha. There's Convergenius, which is working with a lot of governments, across India. And, like Poulomi mentioned, both the strategies have been adopted. So there are certain state governments which are basically, leveraging digital access through multiple forums. So for them, it may not be synchronous learning. It may be WhatsApp-based learning and recorded videos of teachers, which is the only solution which is working. Again, CSF has come up with certain home-based programs where parents can play a role. But the main critical thing in this case is, given that the institutions, the small schools, may not have been able to adopt to digital as quickly as some of the larger institutions, the role of the individual teacher and the home-based learning and the social enterprise which enables this connect has become very critical. So some state governments have taken a lead, others have not. So it's been left to the individual, teacher, the social enterprises or communities who are working in that area. And largely the tech play there has mainly been WhatsApp and recorded videos, nothing more than that. And there will be loss of learning. I think all of us do understand that. World Bank, in fact, has said that there'll be up to a year of loss of learning. And from what we have seen, Pratham's latest ACER report, there's a 4% change, from their initial data in the school dropout population for early years, which is a pretty stark statistic. After we have achieved 99% in school attendance, it's pretty stark. So I think this is still evolving, Samir, and therefore the need for the social sector to be the bridge between technology and the last mile and the teacher and the parent and institution and government, I think, is never more than now.
Absolutely.
Anything to add to that, Hari, Jeet, or should I kind of ask the last question?
No, this is very nice. I think the way you've responded, I learned so much. Beautiful response it was.
Absolutely.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. I think I turned a panelist for just 2 minutes. Now I'll go back to being a moderator. So the last question I have, and I think since all of you know I love to write, this is a futuristic creative question. So if you were to write a science fiction, all of you actually are authors. So if you were to write a science fiction and this was set in 2050 and it's about the digital future of work, what would you name it? I think, Hari, you should start since you're the most prolific author in this group. And then
I'm also the least creative, so I'm very, very cut and dry. So, but I think let me make an attempt. I think 2050 is still 30 years away.
Yes.
And I think 30 years, a lot of things can happen. You can see, SpaceX and Elon Musk putting man into space already, a private company. So I wouldn't be surprised if a few million people are settled in Mars, and therefore working from Mars. Work from Mars can be a title for a book.
Work from Mars. Wow. Amazing. Jeet and Poulomi, your titles?
Poulomi, you want to go? I can do it. It's to Hari's point, is quite far out, and with something like 2020, life is really unpredictable in some form. But let me give it a shot. It's a little bit of a dream and a wish than anything else, because who knows what it will look like. I would love to see 2050 more like what I would call a 3-day-a-week work. When I say that, I will explain it a little bit. I would love to see the fiction saying how from 2020 to 2050, my kid goes to school 3 days a week, but he learns more because technology has enabled him to learn more in those 3 days. And in the rest of the 4 days, he does what he wishes to do, but he's learning there too. So that's from the kid's perspective. My perspective would be my bread earning part of the thing. I can do it in 3 days. Then I can spend the rest of the 4 days, thanks to technology, into many other things. But I still, so it's all about getting a better life in some form. So and it's not just for us as individuals. I would like to be a representative. And so can we really see that brighter side across the society happening? Would love to be that dream again.
2050, a better life. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks, Jeet. Poulomi, just to round it up.
Yes. So, for that question, there has been a lot of prophecy saying that whatever science fiction has predicted has become reality.
Yes.
A lot of research, right? So my book is going to be always as signing off as digitally yours instead of yours sincerely.
Okay, great. Digitally yours. Like a notebook for yourself in 2050.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And I think the reason why I asked this question is because a lot of this is so much in the future we don't know. And one pandemic, like Hari mentioned, could have changed so many things this year. But there are certain underlying shifts which will continue with us. I think the panelists have given us a really fascinating insight into what are those shifts, what it could mean for us very urgently. So thank you so much for that.